In case you haven't heard, Strange World has now become Disney Animation's biggest box office bomb in recent years. Reports have stated that Disney might lose $100 million because of it, maybe even more. But did you know that Strange World is far from the first box office bomb that Disney Animation faced? Some of which you might be surprised to hear, and of course they're all for various reasons. The first box office bomb from Disney was actually back in 1940 with Pinocchio, followed by immediately afterwards Fantasia, and I'll say now the sequel also bombed as well. Then there was Bambi, Alice in Wonderland, Sleeping Beauty. Then after Walt Disney's death, there was The Black Cauldron, The Rescuers Down Under. Then Disney lost so much money on Atlantis The Lost Empire, Treasure Planet, and Home on the Range. Not only that, but some were not well received by critics and audiences during their initial release, like Fantasia and Alice. However, as years and decades have passed, not only are many of these movies are considered some of the greatest from Disney Animation, but they're now considered some of the greatest movies of all time. And if not that, then there's a very good chance that they would go on to have a massive cult following. Moral of this story? Maybe they bombed on their debut, but that just means that their time to shine hasn't arrived yet. So Guillermo del Toro finally managed to release his adaptation of Pinocchio, and it went through quite a journey in order to become real. And I'm not talking about the Pinocchio in the movie, I literally mean the movie itself. You see, this actually all started back in 2008 when Guillermo del Toro first announced of a stop-motion animated adaptation of Pinocchio. He also noted that it would be a darker adaptation as it would be set in 1930s fascist Italy. Following afterwards, Guillermo would give small updates about the movie, including concept art and who would be involved, but for several years the movie kept being locked in development hell. Why? Because there was no studio that was willing to give Del Toro the money in order to bring the movie to life. Someone even suggested to change the movie into a 2D animated film so that the budget would be cheaper, but Del Toro was determined to make the movie in stop motion. It wasn't until in 2018, a whole decade after it was first announced, that Netflix stepped in and granted Del Toro's wish with the money that he needs in order to fully produce the feature. And now that the movie is finally coming to life, I must say that the making of the film sounds as interesting as the movie itself. It's the story of something that went through great lengths in order to become real, just like Pinocchio. It's already been 40 years since the release of The Dark Crystal, and to this day, many people say that it's Jim Henson's greatest non-Muppet related work. But did you know that the movie almost had an animated sequel? Back when they were making the first film, Jim Henson, along with screenwriter David Odell, were thinking about ideas of what would happen if they would create a sequel. Then, 25 years later in the mid-2000s, Odell and his wife decided to be a little more serious about that sequel idea and decided to create a first draft script in which they titled it The Power of the Dark Crystal. However, instead of having it with complex puppets and intricate sets, they decided that The Power of the Dark Crystal would be an animated sequel. They even hired Samurai Jack creator Genndy Tartakovsky to be the director, and bring on board the animation studio that he was leading, Orphanage Animation. On a side note, Orphanage Animation did not last long as a studio, and the only thing that they and Genndy were able to create was Symbionic Titan. But anyways, back onto The Power of the Dark Crystal. Sadly, that was the closest they got to actually making the movie. Following afterwards, the only updates that it ever gotten was the fact that the production was kept on being delayed, until inevitably the Jim Henson Company decided to just pull the plug and cancel the project. However, that did not mean that they threw away that script. In 2017, Odell's script was turned into a 12-part comic series. Sure, it's no action-packed Genndy Tartakovsky movie, but at least it's something. Nowadays, it's almost impossible to go through the holidays without at least watching one adaptation of A Christmas Carol. But did you know as of 2022, there are a total of 18 animated adaptations of the story? And keep in mind, this is only counting the movies and the specials. This doesn't even count the numerous of live action versions, or any of the versions that are just episodes from a show. Some of these adaptations are more straightforward, including the 1971 Oscar-winning special by Richard Williams, the 2009 motion capture movie where Jim Carrey plays Scrooge and all the ghosts, and they can be as recent as the 2022 Netflix musical. But what could be considered some of the most recognizable versions are the ones that feature famous characters. These include, of course, Mickey Mouse with Mickey's Christmas Carol, the Sony version of the Smurfs, the Flintstones, the Looney Tunes, who did it twice, All Dogs Go to Heaven, and Mr. Magoo, which the latter is not only the first ever animated adaptation of A Christmas Carol, but it is also the first ever animated Christmas TV special. Happy holidays, everyone! It wasn't easy for the team at Disney to name the 7 dwarves in Snow White. In fact, during development, they thought about around 50 names that would potentially encompass the personalities of each dwarf. There was one, however, that was actually very close to making it in the final film, but he just so happened to also be one of the worst ones that they could ever think of. And who would that problematic dwarf be? Meet Deafy! And yes, his name reflects exactly what you think he is. In the film, he would have been one of the more comedic dwarfs where his shtick was that he had very bad hearing. Every time the dwarves would tell him to do something, his poor hearing would cause him to do something completely different but only sounds a bit similar to what they actually said. This would also cause Deafy to be in arguments with Grumpy a lot because of either something that he completely misunderstood, or he can't stop asking him, What did he say? But ultimately, when it was time to finally settle who the 7 dwarves would be for the film, Deafy ultimately got cut out, and I may not have any confirmation about this, but based on concept art that features Deafy, it seems most likely that he might have been replaced by Sneezy. Maybe they didn't know it back then, but Disney didn't dodge a bullet. They dodged a cannonball by cutting him out! After more than 25 years, Ash's adventures in the Pokemon anime has finally come to an end. He finally became a Pokemon master and the very best that no one ever was. So it's only fitting that his journey alongside Pikachu concludes on a happy note like that. But did you know that Pikachu was not the first choice for Ash's first Pokemon? Way back in the franchise's beginnings in the late 1990s, when they started to expand outside of the video games, the creators were thinking that the main Pokemon star should be Clefairy. No, it's not any of the starters. It's the Pokemon with a connection to the moon that they thought would be their big star. In fact, they tried that out in the original manga, where they made Clefairy the protagonist's main Pokemon in order to make things more engaging for the reader. However, when it was time to start developing the anime, they decided to switch things around for the main Pokemon and decided to give Pikachu the leading role. The reason for the switch is because the marketers believed that Pikachu would be more appealing to girls as much as he would be appealing to boys. He looks more like a common household pet more so than Clefairy, and the fact that he is yellow, which makes him a whole lot easier to recognize. And since then, Pikachu's popularity became so big that he earned the nickname of the Japanese Mickey Mouse. I know that sounds a little bit weird, but sometimes the right choice of color can help you stand out. Believe me, I know. I think it's safe to say now that the most groundbreaking animated feature in recent years is Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. Not only did it manage to grab its legendary status faster than most other movies out there, but it also inspired many others in order to be a lot more stylistic with their computer animation. One of them being DreamWorks Animation. In fact, in 2022, both animated features that they released that year had their animation be inspired by the style of Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, which are The Bad Guys and Puss in Boots: The Last Wish. But of course, Spider-Verse wasn't the only source of inspiration for their style. Coincidentally, they both also have some anime influence, where The Bad Guys was also inspired by Lupin III, and The Last Wish was also inspired by Akira. On a side note, and another coincidence, both these movies also had someone working on the film who was a key player in Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. The composer of The Bad Guys was Daniel Pemberton, and before being replaced by Joel Crawford, one of the Spider-Verse directors, Bob Persichetti, took the helm of The Last Wish. Guess Spider-Verse made a far greater impact in the industry than just being an amazing film. You all remember this meme, right?
Father, when can I leave to be on my own? I've got the whole world to see.
Well, believe it or not, it is the 1-year anniversary of that Pinocchio meme. But how the fridge did this random Pinocchio movie ended up becoming so popular in the first place? Well, it actually happened on social media when a YouTuber uploaded a clip from the trailer after talking about it on his podcast, commenting how Pauly Shore's performance was unintentionally funny in that clip. However, that little clip ended up becoming much more popular than people expected as people kept on sharing it and the clip became a lot more viral. Especially on Twitter where it gathered millions of views and almost 200,000 likes. Of course, the American distributor of the film, Lionsgate, started to notice the viral nature of that clip from their trailer. And so they decided to carry that clip onto TikTok, and that's where it became the meme that we all know today. How do I know all this? Because that YouTuber who uploaded the clip in the first place was me.
Out of all the years that I've been on the internet, never did I expect that I would take a random movie like Pinocchio: A True Story and turn that into a phenomenon.
We all know Mel Blanc as one of the greatest voice actors of all time thanks to his legendary work with the Looney Tunes. But did you know that he also did a handful of voices for Disney? The first voice that he did for Disney was Gideon from Pinocchio. And yes, Gideon was originally supposed to talk. But eventually, the team at Disney decided to make him mute, and all of Mel's recordings ended up getting scrapped. The only thing that was left in the final film was just a single hiccup. But hold on, that's not all. Yes, there technically was Who Framed Roger Rabbit where he reprised his Looney Tunes voices for the final time, but that's not the one that I want to talk about. There is another Disney project where Mel Blanc was a lot more prominent than in Pinocchio. And that is the classic Disney attraction in which you can find at Walt Disney World right now, the Carousel of Progress, where he is the voice of Cousin Orville.
No privacy at all around this place.
Sorry, Orville.
So I just saw Pixar's Cars recently, and it was the kind of movie that the more you think about its concept, the more it's weird. And to show you what I mean, here are 5 disturbing facts about Pixar's Cars. In a couple of instances, Lightning McQueen sticks out his tongue. And if cars can have a tongue, then they probably also have internal organs as well. When McQueen enters the courtroom, Fillmore and Sarge call him a fascist and a commie respectively, which means that even in the Cars universe, fascism and communism exist. Not only that, but there is also a god in this universe, and they call them the Manufacturer. On his way to California, Mac passes by a truck stop in which it advertises that it has convertible waitresses. And since the place is actually called the Top-Down Truck Stop, that means that the waitresses are actually topless. McQueen's sponsor, Rusty's, is a bumper ointment, which makes it the car equivalent of Preparation H, which means that even cars can get hemorrhages. Just remember that when someone tells you to not think too much about a cartoon, they just want to protect you from thinking about stuff like that.